Uh-oh. Can you say that again, Hannah? It was hard to hear.
So sharing my slides. I hope that you can see that.
We can see your slides. Yeah, the audio
Perfect.
was a bit muffled for a while. Maybe.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Not
but
better
it
now.
seems to be okay.
Okay, that's good.
So let me introduce you. So hello and welcome back, everyone. Let me introduce you, our guest for today. It's my pleasure to introduce you, Dr. Hannah Decker. Anna was, up until a few days ago, I don't know, technically maybe she's still a PhD student within the Faculty of Social Psychology, Media and Communication at the University of Duisburg-Essen, and she just defended her PhD thesis on Tuesday. So congrats.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Anyway, her research interests include political psychology and persuasion, micro-targeting, and media influences. And today, her talk will focus on her dissertation studies. I believe there are 5 of them, or four or five. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Five, yeah.
Studies that, among several aspects, show the influence of political attitudes on social media exposure, as well as the effects of personalization in persuading voters. So thank you very much, Anna, for joining us today, and I leave it to you.
The slides are on.
Yeah, the slides are gone, by the way.
Yeah, I have some technical issues here now. Somehow my monitor just froze, so I hope that it works now.
Probably. We can
Yeah.
still see you moving and talking, so for now.
Yeah, I hope it's gonna be fine from now. It should be. So let me try again, and then we can start, hopefully.
Yeah, something is happening. There you are.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, thanks for the invitation and also the nice introduction. Yeah, as already introduced, I'm going to present the research that I conducted within the last 3 years of my PhD at the University Duisburg-Essen, which started out mainly focusing on political micro-targeting, but then got a bit broader with the focus of personalization as one aspect and important factor in social media campaigns, from political actors' view to the impact on the electorate. So, trying here now. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to give you a short introduction into the motivation for this research. I think most of you might be familiar with the broader idea of political micro-targeting and the impact that it was supposed to have or allegedly had on the electorate. So I'm just going to give you a short overview of the thoughts that we in our team had before then moving over to my work on this, by always giving a little bit of the theoretical and empirical background, and then looking into the studies that are separated into political actors' role, the impact on the electorate, before then looking further into individual predispositions for personalization within political campaigns. And then I'm going to move over to the discussion on meaning and implications of the work that I did, by showing you a theoretical framework that I derived based on my findings, giving some practical implications, and then outlining some future research that I'm planning. So political micro-targeting gained a lot of attention in different media outlets due to the Cambridge Analytica affair, as most of you might have heard, who claimed to have found a way to spread highly personalized advertising on mainly Facebook, and used that in the Trump campaign, but also in other political campaigns like the UK election campaign. And since that came out, of course, a lot of research started to come up that was focusing on what people actually did, but also on how these personalization could impact political attitudes and decisions. So micro-targeting basically means that based on data that can also be found on social media, but also from other media platforms or other data outlets, very small micro groups are formed that are then addressed with personalized messages that might be more appealing to them and thus be more persuasive. And throughout digitalization, of course, a lot of novelties came up in communication that need to be addressed in research to understand how social media actually change how people communicate, especially in a political way. We can see that political actors can address citizens more directly without gatekeepers like journalists to moderate the conversation of what is going on. And that is also how they can spread messages that are potentially more persuasive, more directly, without any further attention, fact-checking or anything else. So overall, new media have become more and more useful and important in the political context to achieve the basic communication goals, which are usually mobilization, persuasion, but also just extending the reach of messages. And new media are a little bit different than campaigning was before, because they already offer data to gain knowledge of potential voters. They offer a quick and cheap publication format for campaign messages, and then also the combination of database knowledge and personalized communication. Why is that important? Well, based on political efficacy and other research, we know that to actively participate in the democratic process, citizens need to feel informed. So media, of course, are one important part how people get information to actively participate, like, for instance, going to elections and casting their vote. So feeling informed about campaigns and the political actors that are up for elections is important for societies in general to work in democratic ways. I'm going to move over to the research that I conducted. The first part is more focused on what political actors actually do or how they might use personalization within their campaigns on social media. I'm going to move over to a broader aspect, which is the impact on the electorate by presenting research that I did based on personalization, focusing on political attitudes and personality trait matching. Then moving over to emotions or emotional wording in kind of a slightly different setting that's more focused on sustainability advertising. Then I'm gonna present the results of a longitudinal work that I did to show relations in the long term during an election campaign between political social media exposure, political attitudes, and voting. And then I'm gonna move over to a new scale development that I also did within my PhD by assessing value-based political orientations as one precondition or one factor that might be useful to further address in this setting of personalization social media. The first study I'm going to talk about is focusing on the Australian election, the federal election in 2022. As I already said, most of the research, because it was also the Cambridge Analytica affair, mainly focusing on the US context, also focused on what is happening in the US. However, the US context is quite different to the, for example, European context, where we have a lot more multi-party systems. So of course that affects how targeting could be done. And when we look at empirical findings on the EU context, we can see that social media campaigns more used to boost the overall content. So party pages are just trying to extend their reach and that is being imposing or different contexts. And a large focus is on the goal of mobilization within these campaigns and less on persuasion. So overall, there's no really advanced data-driven persuasion strategy that can be analyzed as of now. However, we know that micro-targeting has a potential to also spread or facilitate misinformation, because by addressing only certain people with special issues or topics, there's also the possibility to exclude people that might not agree, so the broader discussion of some topics might be avoided. What we did in that study was we had a large list of party profiles and candidates that were campaigning in the election, and we scraped the advertising data from the Meta Ads library, only focusing on Facebook ads here. And then we got the organic content from CrowdTangle that we then used for topic modeling approach, so computer-based analysis of the overarching topics in our data, by focusing mainly on the differences that came based on the type of content, meaning that organic postings were compared with the paid advertisements, by assuming that the paid advertisement, if it's targeted based on special interests or topics and issues that might be of interest for smaller groups, then there would be a broader variety within this content. But we also analyzed the different parties and candidates in comparison, and also looked into the different parties paying. And what we found for our main focus, comparing organic posts and paid ads, was that the overall topic model for the organic postings had the best fit based on quality indices, but also semantic evaluation for 26 topics. And the paid ads had the best model fit for 16 topics. So there was a slightly higher amount of topics per document for the paid ads. However, the data sets were also quite different in size. So only looking into the topics per document and then saying, oh, we have a broader variety here, was not really enough for our analysis. What we did was, and you can see an example here, also separated by the different coalition groups, parties, or the independent candidates that we also used as one group. We manually clustered the topics that we found into broader issue clusters. We found that there was, in both data sets, so organic posts and the paid ads, similarities within the topics, with social issues always appearing, then overall campaigning or mobilizing content. So it was more like information about the election in general that we found here. And then we had environmental policy or sustainability issues, and also some topics that were focusing on the economy or investments. And as you can also see in the results here, is that the parties put a focus based on their key topics that they are usually associated with, based on these more social issue clusters or the overall topic clusters that we had. And the best example, I think, is the Green Party, as you can see here, because they almost only talked about that in both data sets. But also the Labour Party can be seen with more social issues, while the more conservative parties focus more on economy and investment. Overall, what we found that there wasn't a very substantial difference in the topics between between the organic postings and the paid advertisements. So the difference that we were expecting based on the targeting potential within the advertisements, we couldn't really find in our large-scale analysis here. However, what we found additionally to the assumed topics and also campaigning issues that we found was that each of the data sets also had a distinct topic for effective wording, which was mainly focusing on negative campaigning towards the opponent or overall government critique, which then also will be maybe interesting for the next slide. So with that, we also looked into, or already looked into, what kind of content parties might actually use when they have the potential to personalize content and campaign on social media. Now I'm going to look further into how the electorate or how citizens might process this kind of information. And within the study that I'm going to present next, we analyzed the persuasive effects of prior attitudes and personality traits. What we know is based on research that came way before social media or online media, is that there's an influence of the prior attitudes that people have. A confirmation bias is described in different theoretical claims on reasoning processes, but also media selection, which basically describes that people favor content that is in line with their existing attitude. When it comes to personality, there's different work also on personality effects within communication. First of all, of course, what is important to have in mind is that potentially it is possible to derive these highly personal information like personality traits from online data, as was shown by Kosinski and colleagues. We also know that in general, extroverted messages can be more persuasive than more introverted messages. So there might also be a direct effect of personality traits within communication. But there's also research on matching personality and the messages that could show that there's kind of a personality congruency effect on the evaluations that follow such communication. However, this was in most studies so far shown for so-called persuadables, which means that people were already in favor of the sender of the content. So the personality effect that was analyzed here is more like an enhancing effect of the confirmation bias that can be assumed. And what we did, we tried to get a better idea about how attitude congruency and personality matching might work in a combined setting. And we created an online experiment where we measured the prior attitude of participants on the fly. And we then used some of those statements to manipulate the stimuli that people saw. And we then used the participants' level of extroversion and attitude strength towards these issues as moderators, and had the dependent variables at evaluation, party evaluation. And our findings are basically presented here. We found a direct effect of attitude congruency. So the confirmation bias that we assumed was also shown in our data, meaning that all dependent variables were rated higher when people saw the attitude congruent stimuli or micro-targeted ad, and that effect was also moderated by attitude strength. We didn't find a direct effect of the personality messages, meaning extroverted communication had no direct effect on the dependent variables. However, what we found was a moderating effect as assumed by the personality matching. The personality trait moderated the effect of personality congruency. But this was only found for ad evaluations here. This is just the summary of the findings so far. And now I'm going to try to combine this a little bit further by also looking into the effects of negative and positive wording within social media advertising on evaluations. Overall, emotions in advertising can be effective, which is explained mainly by the framing theory, meaning that the same object can be evaluated differently depending on the aspects that are framed within the message. However, there's also effective priming, which could be related to that, which means that the priming that can be done within the message, which is often a more positive mood that is tried to be stressed within advertising, that this is then moving over to the following evaluations and hence can affect brand, but also advertising etiquette. What we did here, we had pre-tested stimuli that showed sustainable products. And we again used an online experiment by showing people these advertisements that were either positively or negatively worded. And then we had them evaluate how they found the ad and whether they wanted to purchase one of the products. We also had some other variables in here. I'm going to show you why we are not looking into that a bit further, because we also tried to measure the effective priming outcome by using a mood manipulation, which in this experiment did not work. So that is also why I'm not focusing on it too much. However, what we found was that in line with the more overall marketing literature, the positive wording had an effect on the ad evaluation. So the positive wording was more persuasive. However, this was also only found for the ad evaluation and not for the behavioral intention, meaning that the purchase intention was not affected here. To combine this now with the results that we've seen before, we found that even though in the political campaigning research that we analyzed, political actors used more negative wording or negative campaigning within their content, at least based on our sustainability advertising experiment, we found that positive wording might be more effective. And now I'm gonna present the findings that we did by analyzing full campaign period, by looking further into the longitudinal relations of social media exposure, attitudes, and also vote certainty during an election campaign. Based on selective exposure theory, there's also a confirmation bias that can be assumed. However, as the theory already says, this is or can be more focused on the active selection of what people want to see on social media. On social media, of course, it's quite important. There's a lot of information out there, so there has to be some kind of content moderation, feed moderation to give people what they want to see. And this can either be done actively, so that users can, for example, choose the platform that they want to use, follow different accounts that they like, but also by applying some kind of train the algorithm behavior, by liking content in a more strategic way, for example. But it's also on most platforms done using algorithmic content selection, which is also implied when talking about micro-targeting. So we based our assumption that maybe the longitudinal effects of political campaigns could be a bit different or more, a bit different than the ones that we found in our experimental settings, based on assumptions that exposure over time would already have an attitudinal outcome. We also focused on young voters, because first of all, we assumed that their political attitudes and preferences, like partisanship, are not that strong if they have never been to an election before, or at least it's one of the first elections that they actually participate in. And also was found that young voters already consume a lot of political content on social media, and that this political news consumption on social media is also positively affecting political interest or participation. So our study was designed as a longitudinal survey with basically the same measures that we used in 4 different waves, starting 5 weeks prior to the election, and the last wave was the week after the election. Was the media type. We had a set of different media types, but this one's only focusing on social media. And the participants rated how often they had seen political content on social media based on 4 broader topics. Based on the 4 topics that we defined that could be relevant within this election campaign, we also designed our attitudinal measures. So they were representing the overarching topics that we had here. Then we also assessed vote choice certainty to have an indicator of how the voting decision might be affected throughout. We had a small sample, which was mainly based on our students at the University of Duisburg-Essen, because it was a federal state election in our in North Rhine-Westphalia here. The results were mainly gained through a cross-like panel model. We excluded wave 1 here because there was a measurement deviation in one of the variables. So the results are based on the following waves. And what we found was that within the first wave, political social media exposure and attitude strength was related, and also attitude strength and vote certainty. However, throughout the campaign, only attitude strength and vote certainty were related. And the most interesting part was, of course, the cross-legged effects that we could analyze. And we found that attitude strength at one time point negatively affected the vote certainty at the next time point, which might be a bit counterintuitive. We also found a small effect of attitude strength on political social media exposure. However, because we only had a very small sample, we calculated the minimum detectable effect size, and this was below this range. So this really has to be, even though it was significant, definitely has to be interpreted very cautiously. So the results I was talking about now were regarding the whole range of the 8 topics that we analyzed, but to get a better understanding on how the different topics, because people might have different preferences based on these topics, and how that was also or could be found in our data. We did the same model for only one topic, which was mainly focusing on sustainability and energy, because at that time, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the German context, but it was discussed a lot how the energy can be transferred to a more sustainable setting. So that was a broad topic at that time, and that's why we chose this one and also connect the 2 topics. And we found the same confirming relations here on political social media exposure, but they were again below our estimated minimal effect size. What we learned in this study is that the relevant variables that we also found in the research before, which is mainly issue-related communication and attitude strength towards these political issues, are also related within a longitudinal setting during a real campaign period. However, the confirming relations or the confirming effects that we found before were not really as strong as we found them. So maybe also the confirming selection and processing of social media information needs to be analyzed with a bit more attention and a bit more focus for the details here. And we also found that the strong attitudes towards all different topics might have increased uncertainty of people, which was also something that was quite surprising. Overall, what we found is that in that whole realm of personalization on social media in political campaigns, the predispositions like existing attitudes are a key factor that we then looked into further last study. As you might also be very familiar with, is that most of the time when we're talking about broader political orientation, this is assessed using the bipolar measure from left to right, or sometimes conservative, liberal to conservative, which of course is very explicit and easy to use and understand. However, especially when we want to have a better understanding of the underlying mechanisms like confirmation biases, for example, it doesn't really give us a good idea, especially in multi-party systems where we don't have the same bipolar party structure as, for example, in the US. The question here was, how can we have a measure that is also focusing on broader orientations, but gives us a bit more descriptive power? We used the theory of basic personal values, and based on assumptions that values, attitudes, and behavior can be seen as some kind of hierarchy. We were looking into the basic personal values to derive political elements within them. And then we used that to build up items that could only be used in political settings to enhance the descriptiveness of political orientations or predispositions for more communication or media-focused studies. So due to our literature research, we found, again, 8 overarching values that we used from 96 items to represent this value-based topic. We assessed and tested those items in a multinational sample from Germany, UK, the USA, and South Africa. We came to a solution based on exploratory and confirmatory factor analysis of 28 items. Those items described 5 dimensions, with most of the topics that we had derived still represented here. Only globalization was not represented in the final version, and the dimensions security, individuality, and economic development were summarized in one factor, which was economic and personal security in the final version. I'm just going to shortly summarize some of the key findings here. So first of all, what we found was that political predispositions like attitudes are relevant factors in persuasion processes on social media. We also found that confirming existing predispositions, as was shown in study 2, can enhance evaluations of message sender and also intentions to vote, and potentially exposure to social media content, which, however, definitely needs more research attention. We also found that attitude, media exposure, and vote choice are related throughout social media campaigns. However, with the rising finding that strong attitudes lowered vote choice certainty throughout the campaign. And then we also found that political actors use effective wording, mainly focusing on negatively framing opposing parties. However, in our research, we found positive appeals to be more pervasive. Then we found a solution for political predispositions to be measured on a 5-dimensional scale based on political attitude orientation, sorry. Okay, so now I'm going to present shortly the framework based on the findings, also informed by some of the other works to sum up what I did in my research. First of all, it comes to designing content, not only political predispositions, but also personal predispositions can inform content personalization based on different campaign goals. But then we also found in process B here that using political attitudes to personalize content might be an effective strategy. When it comes to the applications that follow personalized content, we found that effective wording, but also attitude matching can have direct effect. Also, the strength of political attitudes moderates this effect. And then we also found that matching personal predispositions and personalized content could enhance evaluation. looking at behavior, we found that some of the effects that came with personalized content came also with higher voting intentions or certainty. So personalizing content based on the factors that we analyzed here can also impact voting intentions or the certainty with a specific behavioral decision. And moving over to the impact of behavior or the relation of behavior and attitudes, first of all, we could see that the certainty or uncertainty with a voting decision is related to attitude strength. And we also know from cognitive dissonance theory how behavior that is shown can affect attitude. So that is why this is a two-way process. And finally, and arrows here only have dotted lines because that's also something for future research. We found that political values can be measured distinctively to inform relations to attitudes, but also maybe personal predispositions and evaluations. However, this wasn't done yet within the research that I did. Maybe some more practical implications that came from my work. I think one important thing that needs to be addressed a little bit more in future research is that political actors are not just acting as people that communicate and try to persuade, but they are also legislators when they form a government. So of course they have kind of a conflicting role because on the one hand they want to be effective in their campaigns to also get re-elected, but they also have to keep societies from harm in the democratic process. So implications from my work definitely show this twofold role that they have, and might also help inform ways to deal with that in a better way, maybe have more institutions or research coming in to inform how legal frameworks could be used in a way so that these two roles are not in a bad conflict situation. And when we're talking about citizens or the electorate in general, using personalization, even though it's often connected to more negative outcomes, can of course also have some positive outcomes, like connecting minority groups. So institutions can also use personalization to directly communicate to minority groups and inform them, give them spaces maybe, or let them know about spaces where they can share their views in safe communication areas. However, of course, as we know, that there's always a risk of political communication if it's not being watched in a right way, if there's no one really looking into how it might be used to misinform people or maybe spread false claims during political campaigns. It could also be used to polarize people more. So overall, my research could also be used to develop more educational or informational measures, especially addressing the confirmation biases that might be influencing the processing of political messages. Just to outline some future research ideas that I had based on what I've done so far. I was using quite a broad range of different methods for this research in my PhD project, which of course, when they are summed up together, always have a problem that they don't really give coherent results. So one thing that I'm also planning for a future study on the EU election now is to use more multi-method approaches to combine social media tracking data with survey data, for example, to get a better idea and more reliable results. And then, of course, the scale that I developed and also presented here definitely needs further evaluation by also being implemented in different research and research questions to then really improve the understanding of personalization. Then it could also be used in comparative settings by focusing on different election campaigns over time or different cultural. Yeah, that's just the summary of my thesis, by also including the political orientation scale as one outcome for a lot of future research. Yeah, so thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer all the questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was very informative, and I really appreciated how you put so many studies together, so to give us a comprehensive view with theoretical and practical implications as well. And I think we have plenty of time for discussion, so I leave it open for questions from the audience. We already have one by Almog.
Yeah, hi Hannah. Thank you so much for the great presentation. I wanted to ask about your findings regarding the strong attitudes and how they predict actually less certainty. I found it a bit counterintuitive, and I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate about it.
Yeah, I mean, it is especially, I think, hard to explain, because at the same time we found that attitude strength at the same time point was positively related to vote choice certainty. So it's not something that we can explain just based on the data, but we had, because the assessment that we used these different topics. So the main assumption was, okay, if people feel very strongly about a lot of different political issues in a multi-party system, so you also have a lot of possibilities to vote for different parties. It might be harder for them to say, "Oh, I'm certain," because if they and in Germany it's the same as we could see in the Australian context. Most parties have like a main topic, like the Green Party, of course, always focusing on sustainability. The Social Democrats more focusing on social aspects. So they have their key topics. But if a lot of stuff is important for you, it's hard to choose the right party. So that was our main idea. However, of course, it doesn't really go well with the with defining that at the same time, if you had very strong attitudes, people were more certain. So I would say it definitely needs more attention. But yeah, I think one idea might be that if you have very strong attitudes, it's just you're not that certain which direction to go to.
Thanks.
I actually wanted to ask the same question, so I switched to another one. Well, actually, I have two. One is a bit more specific, and is what actually did you measure when you talked about ad evaluation sometimes in some of the studies? And my second question is that if you can expand a little bit more on the scale that you, if I understand correctly, created, like the POS or something like that. So how maybe it relates with a sort of bipolar scale, liberal and conservative, if you tried to measure a sort of correlation between what we have and what you came up with.
The first question was on the...
when you talk about ad evaluation, what are you actually evaluating?
Yeah, so we tried to use different levels of evaluations, with, of course, ad evaluations being probably the less, the least specific one, because that was basically just asking people how much they like the ad using different adjectives. So yeah, that's just kind of, I think it was the same items actually as the party evaluations. So just to have them think about how much they liked it in different terms. Yeah, and then also the personality matching effect that we found. There was also something why we looked into more longitudinal relations a bit further, because if only the ad evaluation is affected, so people are like, yeah, I think maybe the advertising text is a little bit nicer. That doesn't really say a lot about how they will behave in further elections. And then, of course, the idea came up that just by seeing as they like more over a long period of time, maybe then they also like the party more. But we didn't really know that much about that. So yeah. Oh yeah, and then you were asking about the scale, sorry. Yeah, we of course did some further analysis with the scale as well. And the topics that you could see, or the values that you could see in the end, there was sustainability again, but also equality or solidarity, which is more like the social issue aspect in there. And they were correlated with the left-right measures that we also included in our analysis. But what we could find, and that was actually quite good to see, but that was all based on the same measurement. So we definitely need to have more research on that. But we also asked people for their party preferences. And of course, the left-right scale usually also matches with, for example, in the German system, those ones that are a bit more left also prefer the Social Democrats, but also the Green Party. But then it's hard to say where the differences lie. And what we could see by adding our dimensions was that just as expected, equality would be more something that appeals to the ones that prefer the Social Democrats, while sustainability, for example, is of course the main value that drives party preferences for the Green Party. So something like that was already there. And we also found that the dimensions that we had explained a bit further the drivers for the two-party systems, like the US, for example. So that was quite interesting to see.
I see. Thank you. Let's see if we have further questions. Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. Very nice talk. Now, I've had a bit of an internet issue here, so I may be asking the same question that Almog has asked. I'm not entirely sure. But basically, you concluded two things from study 4. One was that there's a strong relationship between attitude strength and vote certainty, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then you also have that negative lag effect. And I don't see how the two go together yet. I need a bit more explanation for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, all the explanations that we can do now that we have the data, because it wasn't hypothesized, is a bit like a guessing game. But the main idea was what we had was that people that are very uncertain, especially on the long run, but have, no, the other way around. So the ones that have strong attitudes on all these different topics are not so certain about the upcoming or in the next round, so to speak, of the vote certainty. But if they are very strongly feeling about some stuff at the same time, they might be more certain about it. However, the problem was that we didn't, I mean, not yet at least, look into the different topics more specifically. We only looked into the one topic for an additional model. And when you only look at the one topic, the negative effect was also not there. So people that only feel strong about the one topic don't have that issue. And that was why the idea came up. If they feel very strongly about all political issues, they might be less certain in the long run. Even though
what okay. So what that means is if I feel strongly about something today, I also know how I'm going to vote. But if I then drift in my attitudes, I'm less likely to know what I'm going to vote for at the next round when you ask me again. That's basically what's happening.
Yeah, that's at least the idea that should be tested further, I would say.
Okay, because see how you can have all of these things going on without some shift in attitudes or in the issues underlying your attitudes. That's what because there's a whole profile of attitudes, right?
Yeah.
Right. So okay, all right, thank you.
Oh, and also for the analysis, we only used the attitude strength, but not the positions. So of course,
Right.
because this was pre-registered, so we didn't really, I mean, we at least tried to stick to the original plan. But then when we had the data and we did the first analysis, it was as it usually happens, even if you pre-register that. We saw a lot more things coming out. But I think especially because we only had such a small sample size and everything, what we did now was we still wanted to publish what we had, but also realized that it needs a lot of further work to dive into the relations between these variables, yeah. And probably also looking more into the positions that might change.
Almog?
Yeah, thanks. I have a follow-up thought. I mean, so maybe just to clarify, were the attitudes, did you measure them at each time point, or only? Okay. And is there a so were people who were having strong attitudes at time 1, were they also having strong attitudes at time 2 and 3?
Yes, but the attitude, we had additional hypotheses that the attitudes would get stronger throughout the campaign, which we also found in the data. Because we were expecting it, because they see more content, because it is an election campaign, so they get more information. And that is why the assumption was that, the attitude strength will grow between the different waves, which we also found.
So it's not compatible with my working hypothesis that this might be a regression to the mean kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I thought maybe like the strength of attitude is some sort of proxy to certainty in voting, which might be the same, very much related. And then if you measure at one point people who hold very strong opinions, the next time you measure it, they hold less strong opinions because regression to the mean. But I don't know. It doesn't sound compatible with that hypothesis.
Yeah, I think the problem is actually how you define the attitude. And that was a main problem that I had to deal with when I started the whole research there, because attitudes are measured in very different ways. Sometimes attitudes are measured just like people use the left and right thing and they say that's an attitude. And I use it in a very more detailed way regarding specific policy statements. So whether people agree or disagree with specific policies, and then I measured how much they cared about it, how interested they were in that to define the attitude strength. But it was, that is also why it's depending so much if you measure it like that on the context and on the time frame, because of course all campaigns are very different. And I mean, now with all the new crises coming up, there's very different topics that are discussed during election campaigns. So to have that in a comparative setting, in a detailed assessment that I used, is almost impossible. So yeah. But then it might also give you a better understanding of the topics that are interesting for people. So a bit more about how people inform or come to their voting decision, to party preferences. But yeah.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Steve. Do we have any further question? Otherwise, I can ask for a clarification. Yeah, let me definitely unmute myself. Can you go, Anna, to the results of slide, well, sorry, not to slide, of study 2. So it was quite back, one of the, just to see if I got things correctly. So that was my doubt. Yeah, I think yeah, so if I get things correctly, it doesn't matter. So the personality is personality of the message, right? So it doesn't matter whether the personality of the message is introverted or extroverted, but what matters is that it matches with the attitude of the persons, right? Did I get
exactly?
Okay, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
That's the micro-targeting, I mean,
Sure.
the matching kind of aspect in there. Yeah.
But then you said it only affects ad evaluation or also party and voting intention?
Yeah, it was only affecting the ad evaluations. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, okay. So no, I just want to see if I got this right. Thanks. Well, if there are no further questions, maybe we can wrap things up here. So thank you very much, Anna, for joining us today. And thank you,
Yes,
everybody.
thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. And thanks, everyone, for attending this. Anna, if you want to get added to the mailing list, there's a generic mailing list we have here to get invited to these meetings. Let me know. Drop me an email, and I'd like to. And well, yeah, I'll see everybody next week, I guess. Thank you very much. And good luck, Anna, with everything. So with your PhD and what comes in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.